Our lecture for today is going to be about critical discourse analysis, and it's going to be an introduction to this field of inquiry. In this lecture, we will cover a number of items. First, we will start with the definitions of CDA, and then we will go to trace the development of CDA throughout history, and through this we will find something about the theoretical origins of this discipline. After that, we will sketch a number of models, actually the three major models or frameworks within critical discourse analysis. The first one is the Faircloughian dialectical relational approach, or what is called the 3D approach. The second is the socio-cognitive approach adopted by Tom van Dyck. And the third one is the discourse-historical approach by Ruth Wittig. Actually, these three approaches are not the only approaches or frameworks in this discipline. We have other approaches such as the semiotic approach and the cultural approach and the social semiotic approach. But for the purpose of our study for today, we will go only through these three. At the beginning, we have to know something about what is CDA. CDA, according to Van Dyck, is a critical discourse analysis. And when we say critical discourse analysis, we mean that it is a type of discourse analysis, just like the sociolinguistic and pragmatic approaches. But here in this field, we are concerned with studying and analyzing both the written and the spoken text. And the main aim behind studying these practices or texts is to study or to reveal or unravel the discursive sources of power, dominance, inequality, and bias. And of course, we will study within this the discursive sources as maintained and reproduced in the text. Actually, the main concern here is the social, the political, and the historical context within which a certain text or discourse is produced. Again, Fairclough in 1993 defines CDA as a discourse analysis. Again, it is a type of discourse analysis which aims to explore often opaque relationships of causality and determination between discursive practices, event desks, and wider social and cultural structure. And of course, in order to investigate these practices, event, and texts, there is a need for coming across or studying the ideology and how ideology shapes the ideas of the people, the attitudes, and how these attitudes are also shaped by the power and the struggle relations in society. And of course, we are always after revealing what is opaque of these or the opacity of these relationships between discourse and society. Again, if we want to deconstruct these three terms, the word critical and the word discourse and the word analysis, we have to start with how can this kind of approach to discourse be critical? Again, the term critical is associated with Frankfurt School of Philosophy, and of course, this school of philosophy re-examines the foundation of Marxist thought. So they can be called the new Marxist tradition. Of course, if we go back further and examine critique, the word critique as presented by Kant, Immanuel Kant, then it means a rational analysis of questions, of the questions of how human knowledge is limited and how human knowledge is understood. And of course, the Frankfurt School extends this analysis of cultural forms of various kinds, and now they are seen as being central for the reproduction of capitalist social relations. And according to Habermas, one of the Frankfurt School pioneers, critical science has to be self-reflexive. That is to say, it reflects on the interests that underlie it. Again, if we go to trace the development of CDA, we find that the first impetus for this kind of study started in the late 70s with the critical linguistics, which was developed by a number of linguists and literary theorists at the University of East Anglia, and their approach was based on Holidayan systemic functional linguistics. At the beginning, this kind of thought was called critical linguistics, and the practitioner aimed at isolating ideology in discourse and showing how ideology and ideological processes are manifested as systems of linguistic characteristics. And of course, in their attempt, they followed Holidayan systemic functional linguistics, and especially the three meta functions: the ideational, interpersonal, and textual functions. And of course, according to Holiday, language is considered as a social act, and it is this idea of social act is highly central to many CDA practitioners. According to Fowler, who is one of the critical linguists, critical linguists, like sociolinguistics, asserts that there are strong and pervasive connections between linguistic structures and social structures. However, while sociolinguistics deals with the concepts language and society and how they are divided, so that one is forced to talk of links between the two, for critical linguistics, language is an integral part of social processes. That is to say, there is no separation between society and language. Another central assumption of CDA and systemic functional linguistics is that speakers make choices regarding vocabulary and grammar. And the idea of choice is very important here, whether this choice is consciously or unconsciously principled and systematic. So these choices of the speaker, of the language users, are ideologically based. So ideology plays an important role in the manifestation of these choices. So according to Fowler, the relation between form and content is not arbitrary or conventional, but its form here signifies content. If we want to summarize this, we can say that language is a social act that is ideologically driven. If we go to study the theoretical origins of critical discourse analysis, it has its origins in Western Marxism, and in broad terms, Western Marxism places a particular emphasis on the role of cultural dimensions in reproducing capitalist social relations. This necessarily implies a focus on meaning making, that is to say semiosis, and ideology as key mechanisms in this process. And of course, we should not forget the efforts of Antonio Gramsci, the Frankfurt School, Louis Althusser. And these are people who contributed a lot to the idea of critical discourse and to the ideas of critical discourse analysis. We'll start with one of the influential figures in modern thought, and this man is Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci is an Italian Marxist. He was one of the leaders of the Social Party in Italy, and he worked on the maintenance of contemporary power that rests not only on coercive force but also on hegemony. That is to say, winning the consent of the majority. And of course, the idea of hegemony is very important in our study of how power relations manifest in discourse. The other figure is Louis Althusser, and here we, in CDA, we make use of his major contribution to the theory of ideology, demonstrating how these are linked to material practices that are embedded in social institutions. He also showed their capacity to position people as social subjects. The other highly influential figure is Michel Foucault, who directed against such structuralist accounts of ideology. Foucault's work on discourse has generated immense interest in discourse analysis, but also not only in discourse analysis, but also in the analysis of rather abstract sort that is not anchored in a close analysis of particular text. According to Foucault, discourses are knowledge systems of the human sciences. So we have discourses and not discourse. We have medical discourse, economic discourse, linguistic discourse, and so on. So according to him, discourse is highly institutional, and there are orders of discourses and not one discourse, and these institutions constitute power in modern society. The other figure that influenced the rise of critical discourse analysis is the French sociologist Bourdieu, and he is a highly influential figure in this, especially in his work of 1991 on the relationship between language, social position, and symbolic value in the dynamics of power relations. Another important figure who works on both linguistics and literary studies is Bakhtin, who also been important in discourse analysis. His first work was on linguistics, theory of ideology, and of course he emphasized upon the dialogical properties of text. That is to say, texts are always dialogic between the producer and the reader and the audience, and he introduced the idea of intertextuality as then developed by Julia Kristeva in her thesis of 1986. Of course, this is only an introduction to what is known about the origin and the theoretical background of the critical discourse analysis. So after knowing the theoretical origin, after knowing the main figures who influence this kind of thought or this kind of discipline, now we come to the models, because we know that CDA, or critical discourse analysis, is not a unified theory. It is a framework that provides a number of models, a number of theories which work in different directions. We start with Norman Fairclough. Norman Fairclough is one of the distinguished figures. He is he is the reason for the rise of the term critical discourse analysis. According to Fairclough, critical discourse analysis, in practicing critical discourse analysis, we have three stages or three dimensions. Number one is the dimension of description. That is to say, the description of the formal properties of the text. So in this stage, the emphasis of the analysis is on the linguistic and formal properties. That is to say, on the textual level. Then, the second stage, we relate these textual elements or formal elements of the text with the interaction. That is to say, we relate the text and the interaction. So in this case, we view the text as the product of the process of production and as a source for the process of interpretation. So interpretation occurs when we relate the formal analysis with the discursive practice. The third dimension, or the third stage of critical discourse analysis, is explanation. And here we relate between the interaction within a certain context with the social or the socio-political context. And here we provide explanation of the text. The second model or approach is called the socio-cognitive approach, and it was introduced in the late 80s by Toon van Dijk. In this approach, there is an interaction between cognition, discourse, and society, as the title of this framework shows. So there is a space for society, there is a space for cognition, and there is a space for discourse. So there is an interrelationship between these three three domains. Of course, we start with the formal text analysis. That is to say, we follow certain schools of linguistics, especially the systemic functional linguistics, and then we incorporate elements of the standard psychological memory models of memory that we call frames. And the frames are taken, the word frame is taken from cognitive sciences. And a large part of Van Dijk's practical investigation deals with stereotypes. That is to say, the reproduction of ethnic prejudice, power abuse by elites, and resistance by dominated groups. The third approach is called historic discourse approach or discourse historical approach, DHA. It was introduced by Ruth Widdick, and she used to be part of Vienna's circle of scholars working in the traditions of Bernstein efforts in sociolinguistics, and they relate this kind of sociolinguistics with the Frankfurt School approach. And it is this approach is highly associated with large programs of research and interdisciplinary research teams focusing on sexism, anti-Semitism, and racism. Of course, now this is the lecture that I wanted to introduce today. And of course, there are many other points that can be raised during the course of your study. Thank you very much.